What's up, everybody? This is your host, Nick Leach, and I am so happy you are joining us for a very special episode. The Cinema Club is like a book club, but for movies. Every other week, I invite one member of the Cinema Club to be my co-host for the week, who will choose the movie of the week and join me on the podcast to talk about the film. This week, we are tackling the monumental and unprecedented new film, Zack Snyder's Justice League. This episode is just a little bit different because we're talking about such a recent film that I don't want to give the whole thing away, and it would almost be impossible to cover a film that is over 4 hours long. Zack Snyder's Justice League, often referred to as the Snyder Cut, is the 2021 director's cut of the 2017 superhero film Justice League. It's a 71 on Rotten Tomatoes and a whopping runtime of 4 hours and 2 minutes. So let's get into it. Enjoy Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Dark among the stars, the god is dead.
I had a dream, almost like a premonition. I think there's an attack coming.
My lord, this world will fall.
I need warriors. I'm building an alliance to defend ourselves.
How do you know your team's strong enough? If you can't bring down the charging bull, then don't wave the red cape at it.
You were sent here for a reason. And even if it takes you the rest of your life, find out what that reason is.
They said the age of heroes would never come again.
It will. It has to.
We live in a society where honor is a distant memory. Isn't that right, Batman?
And as always, just to be completely clear before we get any further, I just want to give a big spoiler warning because we are going to be talking about a lot of spoiler-heavy things about the film. So again, we are covering the Snyder Cut, and I'm so excited to talk about this. We're going to be doing a little bit different kind of episode than what we usually do, just because it is such a new movie that I don't want to give it all away. And also, HBO Max is a paywall, so just want to give you all the opportunities to watch it before you listen to the podcast. And we'll try not to give everything away. We're going to be, I've already given a huge spoiler warning to y'all, so just be aware of that. We will be getting into it. So with that, I want to introduce my guests. I have two very special guests. The first guest is a regular to our show. You've heard him a few times. It is my best friend, Chris Amick. Chris, so good to have you back on the podcast.
So good to be here. Thanks for having me, Nick. I'm really excited to be delving into this film this week.
And we have a very, very special guest, kind of the reason that this podcast is happening, a guy that lives and breathes the Snyder Cut pretty much. I'm so glad to have him on. His knowledge of the Snyder Cut is extensive, so glad to have you on. It is Darren Kirsch. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I never thought I'd actually be on the podcast, so it's really awesome to be here and excited to talk about Justice League, Snyder Cut. Let's do it.
Absolutely. So tell me just a little bit about, we've gotten a little bit of an intro to Chris, but tell me a little bit about yourself, kind of what you do, what brings you to the podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the big things in my life, basically, I'm a huge Zack Snyder fan. I'm a big fan of his movies. I have been. I was kind of first introduced to him kind of late. I wasn't like right away. I kind of got into it with like Man of Steel. Was when I first kind of discovered him, and then you kind of go back and you're like, wow, this guy's awesome. Like this is going to be so bonkers. And it was. And Man of Steel had a huge impact on my life. And obviously leading up to, Batman v Superman, which was something that was for me, like the most exciting thing in the world ever. How does it top that? Right. Like my two favorite characters. And then of course, everything that happened with Justice League. And, I thought Zach really got the short end of the stick. And, ever since, I had this really strong belief in him and his artistic integrity. And I just, I have a lot of respect for him, and I look up to him and admire him. And I really wanted to honor him and basically really to support him. And so the awesome thing about the internet, and people don't always seem to, they talk about a lot of the downsides of the internet, but one of the really awesome things about social media is you're able to interact with people all over the world, right? So you're able to connect with people who also have shared this passion for Zach's movies. And also the fandom started to, really push the idea of, people were hearing that, like Zach's early on, even that Zach's did have a cut of Justice League. And we really stood behind it, and we believed it. And obviously Zach did too, kind of nudging us on the way. And we kind of, I guess you could say, willed it into existence. So it's going to be really fun to talk about it.
And on that note, just because let's give a little bit of context to the Snyder Cut a little bit. The Snyder Cut came about because originally the Justice League that released in 2017 was originally written, directed, and produced by Zack Snyder and his team. But then due to extenuating circumstances, due to crazy circumstances, and we'll get into that later, he had to leave. And then in comes Marvel's super heavyweight Joss Whedon, and then he kind of takes over, and us as the fans kind of heard that he basically just threw Zack Snyder's stuff out the window and reshot a whole bunch of stuff. And in the end, only used about 10% of Zack Snyder's actual original footage. And so we as the fans are just like, well, there's all this footage. And when it came out in 2017, the movie was shit. Justice League, the original Whedon cut, is a horrible movie. Joss Whedon, he made Avengers, and Avengers is so much better. And you'd think years after he had done Avengers, he could actually do something good, but it's shit. And so because all of this stuff, he had so much footage, all of us fans were like, we got to do this. We got to actually have this. We really want that cut. See Zack Snyder's vision.
Obviously, like I just said, like I'm a big fan of Zack, and what happened with Justice League and the support and like the rallying cry of the fans, but also I think also seeing some of the people involved with Justice League kind of chime in and support it as well, and kind of keep the fans keep giving us hope, that it would one day come to existence, and here we are.
Exactly. And the other part too, and Chris, this is kind of why you're on, is if our listeners remember and listen to the TV special, Chris and I actually did talk a bit about Zack Snyder back then and his original Watchmen movie that he made that really vaulted him to a whole nother level in filmmaking and really showed us what a superhero movie could be, and why we were so hyped about his cut, because we knew that Watchmen was a very dark movie, and we know that DC Comics is at its essence very dark comparatively to Marvel. And so we hadn't seen a film yet that actually delved really deep into the darkness of the DC universe, making these superheroes actually having to deal. Batman, Superman, we started to get it, but Zack Snyder was then going to bring that into the forefront and show us actually really how these superheroes, and give them really, pardon my phrase, but give them the justice that they so deserved. And we didn't get that through the Whedon cut.
Agreed. Yeah, I actually rewatched the theatrical cut like a day or two before I sat down and watched the new cut. And it was like a night and day difference, obviously. But really looking back, the theatrical cut is very empty. There's just so much backstory that isn't really incorporated. So if you still haven't watched it, change that, go watch this new cut. It's worth the HBO Max subscription, which I got just for this film. So
So let's get into that, really, where this film and how it actually came to being. Darren, you kind of touched on what the fans did, but tell me a little bit more about really where this thing went and how this thing actually got to where it got to, if you guys know.
Yeah, absolutely. So especially early on, after Justice League comes out in theaters, it kind of bombs and doesn't do well financially, doesn't do well critically. It's kind of called the Frankenstein's monster. And basically, for those that maybe aren't like fully aware of kind of the why, so obviously Zack Snyder, his daughter passed away tragically. And so he stepped away from the movie in post-production, right? Everything was shot.
Not only did she die tragically, specifically, his daughter, Autumn, committed suicide. And that is why he had to leave the movie, because he needed to deal with the family. And I mean, who wouldn't be dealing with a bunch of grief? And that really shows in this Snyder cut. But his daughter did commit suicide, and that was why he did leave the movie.
Yeah, it's very sad. So yes, so Justice League comes and goes, and obviously, like we know what happened with Joss Whedon, reshooting stuff, cutting out all, the vast majority of the stuff that Zack had filmed. So the movie is obviously not well received. The reason why it wasn't pushed back to let Zack come back to it eventually was that there was a merger going on with AT&T and Time Warner at the time. And that was set to go into effect January 2018. And this movie came up in November of 2017 initially. So what happened is if they would have pushed that back into 2018, then they would run the risk of, okay, there's a big new company taking over, lots of new executives. They usually, when that happens, they like to bring in their own people, right? That's just the way that business works. And you see it with sports franchises all the time, right? They get a new coach, they want a new quarterback, or, whatever, right? So they were worried that they would lose their bonuses at the end of the year bonuses. And that was actually referenced, I think it was the Hollywood Reporter. They wrote a big story about it at the time. And that was part of the reason why they didn't want to push it back. But they were really left in a tight spot by leaving it at that spot, and then decided to make all these last minute changes. Henry Cavill and the mustache and all the craziness that happened. But to kind of answer the question of what you were bringing up, how it all kind of started after the movie came out. Obviously, it's not well received. The movie says directed by Zack Snyder, the 2017 version, but everybody knows that wasn't his film, including us fans. And, like Fiona Zhang and like Sean Maher on Twitter, they were the first ones who kind of got the ball rolling. Shiraz Faruqi of Comic Book Debate, a friend of mine, he had heard from his sources that Zack did have a cut of the movie that was near finished at the time. It's not exactly the version we saw just recently, though, right? And then once that kind of got going, a lot of us fans kind of got together and started really pushing the idea for hashtag release the Snyder Cut, and obviously it became a huge phenomena. Like the Times Square billboard, San Diego Comic-Con, there was a billboard, there's the bus stop, obviously the trending campaigns on Twitter. So it just took on a life of its own, and each time, like they actually flew a banner over the Burbank lot of Warner Brothers that said, please release the Snyder Cut. And the cool thing is with each of these events, because based on, so half of the money raised to fund these, like the billboards and the banner and everything, went to American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Half the money raised went to there. So yeah, there was a lot of really amazing things. In total, our fan base has raised over $500,000 for AFSP, and that's super, super awesome. And there's sometimes people like to talk about the toxic nature of fandom and whatnot. And I'm not gonna sit here and say that it never happened, because obviously it did happen. But I think it kind of gets overblown by all the amazing things that also happened by the people who lead this movement and who really strive to, raise it in a positive light.
But then 2020 hits and the pandemic becomes a global pandemic. A lot of people aren't going to the movie theaters anymore. And so up comes this huge streaming giant that is HBO Max. And they really came in and they saved it. I mean, they gave Zack Snyder $275 million to get it to screen. And the other part is, and that pandemic really helped it, is that they went to him and they said, you know what? make this however your vision leads it, that we have no time constraints. Whatever your vision is, you get to make it how you wanted to make it. And that wouldn't have happened. I mean, Warner Bros. Even said that they didn't support it. They do not think that it is canon, and there was no support from them. And so HBO came in and they said, you know what, make it the way that you want to make it. And that's why we have this 4-hour Snyder cut that is a huge beast, but it is so good, and it actually gives the time to tell the story and show the vision that Zack Snyder had originally.
Absolutely, yeah. I would also like to add it. I'm super happy, obviously, for Zach and Debbie, but I'm also really happy for like Fabian Wagner, the DP on the movie, did an amazing job shooting it. He gets his work finally gets recognized. Tom Holkenborg, Junkie XL, the soundtrack is amazing. Chris Terrio wrote the script. He finally gets his due. So it's really awesome to see some of the other people involved kind of get their due as well.
And what's really interesting is that though Zack Snyder was given $275 million from HBO Max to make this thing actually happen, Zack Snyder did do some reshoots to make this thing actually fit the stuff that he wasn't able to get by the time that he left. But in reality, when you look at what he actually shot, he only added an additional 4 minutes to the film with reshoots. The rest he had already shot before.
Yes. Yeah. That was the cool thing is most of this stuff was already shot. It was just a matter of just finishing it up. I know there was a little bit of debate between, is it fully done? Is it ready to be released? Is it not? My thought was, why does it matter? Like look how much of a huge success it was, and I think Deborah Snyder was even on, she did an interview, I believe, and she was talking about how, and even Zach as well, talking about how the fandom and the amount of noise and the amount of excitement and for the movie and anticipation that they have created, it was basically on par or exceeding any of Netflix's original content, and it was definitely bankable. It would be profitable. And obviously now we're seeing the returns of that. And I would also add, yes, it initially was, this was going to be Zach's true vision, right? And they're going to let him do what he wanted to do. But as we have also since learned that that's not 100% true. They had rules per se for what he couldn't do, and he was still kind of fighting the studio to get the version. It's Zack Snyder's Justice League, right? Like, shouldn't it be his movie? So
exactly. But the other part that's really important to kind of talk about here is just the role that the studio makes. And I kind of want to go back and talk about WB and Warner Brothers and what they really did to the film. I mean, Warner Brothers does not consider this film, the Zack Snyder cut, to be canon. But what's really interesting is that with all the other films, with your Wonder Woman, with Aquaman, Jason Momoa even said that Aquaman does fit now with the Zack Snyder canon and timeline, and that instead of happening before the Justice League, it actually happens after Zack Snyder's Justice League. And then Patty Jenkins actually went to Zack Snyder before she made Wonder Woman and said, what can we do to make my film work with your cut and your vision? And so even if Warner Brothers will not accept the Zack Snyder cut to be canon, the directors that made the other movies made sure that they were able to make this work. And so what's awesome about this is that us as fans, the fact that we were able to go and get this thing basically made, the Save the Snyder Cut movement was a huge catalyst to this thing actually being made. I mean, there could still be some movements happening even after now that it's come out, and we have seen now what amazingness that is the Snyder Cut. Who knows?Maybe we as fans can go out and turn this thing around. Maybe.
Yeah. Did you see the trending event that happened? So a couple of days ago, 2-3 days ago, Ann Sarnoff, she's the CEO of Warner Brothers, and she took over for Kevin Tsujihara once he stepped down due to his situation. She basically gave an interview, I think it was for the Variety, and she was basically saying, yeah, we're happy that Zach got to release his movie, but we're not continuing his universe. We have all these other plans for movies and making it more for the general audience. And Zach got to complete his trilogy, as she called it. She also said they weren't going to release David Ayer's version of Suicide Squad, which, that's okay, whatever. I would love to see it, but I mean, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I've kind of made peace with that and future movies. But she said the whole hashtag restore the Snyderverse thing, she's like, that's not going to happen, basically. And then the next day, I think it was yesterday, it actually, the hashtag restore the Snyderverse had, I believe it was over like, it was almost 1.5 million like mentions or tweets in less than 24 hours. And that set like a Hollywood history like record. It even topped Avengers Endgame, which is insane. And they don't want to continue this. And I think that's kind of insane. I understand that might be a little difficult, but they'd be crazy not to revisit this universe. I mean, look at Ray Fisher's Cyborg was amazing. You know, like he deserves a standalone.
He got his due. Like, and the other part too is that with the films that are coming up, I mean, just as Patty Jenkins did, I mean, there can totally be especially with Ezra Miller's Flash and the Flashpoint movie that's coming up. I mean, they're already going with the Flashpoint and with the multiverse and already having all the movies that are on the slate. I mean, you have the Batman with Robin Pattinson that is very different thematically than any of the other films that are in the works. And same with the new Suicide Squad from James Gunn. That's very different. All of these, though, however, are still going to be canon. And so who's to say that the Zack Snyder cut can't actually be canon?
I mean, what is even canon anymore? Am I right? You know,
true. Very true.
Yeah, exactly. So let's actually get into the running time here. 4 hours. But what did 4 hours do? What did it actually do to help the story? Why is 4 hours so important versus the 2.5 hours that the original 2017 Joss Whedon cut did? What does 4 hours do?
As far as like what it does, I think the main thing that I was noticing, you know, as I was watching the Snyder cut was that Cyborg is really the heart and soul, I believe, of this cut of the film. You know, obviously he's got a lot of conflict going on with him personally, with his father, of course, and cutting all of that footage is honestly a crime.
Because let's be real, we haven't seen Cyborg. We haven't seen a couple of these characters. We haven't seen their origin story before in the DCEU. We haven't seen the origin story of Ezra Miller's Flash. And that's exactly what this does. Is this movie is a bunch of different parts. It has a bunch of different plot points and story arcs, and one of them being origin. We have to get the origins for a lot of these characters, especially for Barry Allen and for Cyborg. So that's what it does. And also then all the other stuff that is in the movie.
Yeah. Well, even like the whole opening scene, like, you know, in this Snyder cut, it is connecting those three films that he's made, because it's picking up right where, you know, Batman v Superman picked up, instead of, you know, in the theatrical cut where you got some kid on a cell phone with Superman. Like what? Yeah. So like, there's a lot more setup. It's a lot more connected. I felt like as a viewer, it's a lot more connected to the other, you know, films it's supposed to be canon with. But even like you're kind of saying, Nick, like more backstory, just more badassery. I feel like well, Wonder Woman, for example, like her whole like intro scene when she comes in, there's like a good probably 60 seconds cut out of that, and those 60 seconds really add to her and how she's such a badass woman, honestly. Stuff like that, I think, was how these 4 hours, you know, really add to it. Did it need to be 4 hours? Probably not. But he got to fulfill his vision, and I'm glad that it was something that we all got to see. Like Darren was kind of saying there, it's something that we as fans got to see at the end of the day, which is really cool.
Well, not only just what you're talking about, but then let's also there were a couple other reasons that 4 hours really lends itself for this film and really helps it play out, because we really do see every single character fulfill their own character arcs, their journeys that they're each going through. I mean, a lot of the times we as the audience members are given one character to really glean onto. I mean, even in the crossover movie, and I'm doing the ultimate sin here and bringing in Marvel to the DC universe, universe and saying that the Avengers, you really were following a lot more Tony Stark than you were all these others. You didn't get the character arcs of the rest of them to be fulfilled. Whereas in this movie, every character, their arcs are and their journeys are actually fulfilled. But we also get the villain's agenda, his goals, and his objectives. And we didn't get that in the 2017 cut. And we're not only getting the origin stories of these other characters that we haven't seen before, but we actually see the agenda of the villain, and we see his actual place in not only the comic book universe, but he actually isn't the biggest, baddest guy in this film. Steppenwolf is really kind of this like middle management type person in this this company of villains. And we didn't even see Darkseid in the original 2017 cut. It was all about Steppenwolf, and here we actually see his agenda, which actually ties into the comic book universe and pays homage to that and actually gives that the justice that it deserves. It also shows the scale of the world that we live in and that the characters are living in, and that the characters are having to deal with. We actually see Themyscira and the vault that the mother box is in a little bit more, and we see how the battle that then Steppenwolf has with them, we see that Themyscira really is a huge island. It's a huge place. And then we see how it's so distant from the rest of the world. And then we also see the different places that Steppenwolf goes. He goes all around the globe. And so we're actually able to see the scale of this film as well in 4 hours that we did not get in 2.5.
I would just add, I think the biggest success for this movie is that it's 4 hours long and it makes you want to see more. You wish it was longer. That is the real winner right there. It's not so much like, the 2 hour mandate, like it's as long as it needs to be in order to be the best story you can tell. I think this is a huge win for filmmakers, for artists. I think this is a huge win for everyone working in the industry. And hopefully there's more of this moving forward. And I think that's one of the benefits of streaming content. I'm a big fan of Stranger Things as well. And that's, they have shorter seasons, but it's more of a tighter story arc that doesn't have to be 22, 23 episodes long like network television. And they can tell a more concise story and that doesn't meander for the sake of being forced to. So I think it's awesome. I think it's a huge win for filmmakers and for creative vision as well.
It kind of reminded me, I think it was Netflix who had like the expanded version of The Hateful Eight, I believe. And like you're kind of saying, Darren, like it is really exciting, I think, just as viewers, as fans of this content that, now with streaming media, being such power players, obviously this is a great example with Snyder Cut, but have more impact on this industry now, that we as viewers sometimes can get this kind of content that otherwise we wouldn't be having a 4 hour film in a theater. Exactly.
And let's talk about just a little bit about the director's vision here, and in the amazingness that he was actually able to do what he wanted. And in that same vein, can we just talk about the 4:3 aspect ratio?
Yeah. So what I really like about the 4:3 aspect ratio, and this is a really cool thing too, is that you get to learn a lot about the filmmaking process especially with Zack Snyder and just like the why behind some of the choices that were made. So with the 4:3 aspect ratio, like most movies have widescreen. So there's black bars on the top and the bottom of your screen when you're watching, right? The 239:1. Or, that's most of the time. Sometimes you might see it as like full screen, but it's like a 16:9. It fits your TV. A lot of movies and TV shows are shot for that. What Zach did, Zach and Christopher Nolan is known for this as well. They shoot a lot of stuff for IMAX. And one of the things with IMAX is it's a lot taller image, right? And so one of the things is instead of with the 4:3, it's like the old school format version, because they wanted it in the IMAX ratio because they're going to be doing some IMAX showings in theaters this fall.
But also the 4:3 aspect ratio also is a throwback and a kind of pays homage to classic cinema. You had all these great films such as Citizen Kane and Casablanca that were all shot in 4:3 and all came out in 4:3. And the reason for that was because movie theaters were made to show that, and televisions were made to show a 4:3 aspect ratio, not a widescreen. And I thought it was really cool that Zack Snyder also also not only for IMAX does 4:3 really lend itself so much better, but it also is a callback to classic cinema.
You hit the key thing right there. It's a callback. It's like a throwback to classic cinema with the 4:3. So it's the square image. So you have the black bars on the sides, not the top.
But the other part too, and going to the IMAX thing that you're talking about, is there are a couple directors out there who really like to play with IMAX and because IMAX really is kind of a new kind of technology in the last 10 to 12 years. And there's only a few directors out there who actually really embrace this medium and embrace this technology. And one of them being my favorite director, Christopher Nolan. He loves using IMAX. He almost exclusively uses IMAX. However, what's interesting with Zack Snyder is that Zack Snyder has been kind of experimenting with IMAX for a while now. I mean, in Batman versus Superman, he was using IMAX, that 4:3 format, for a lot of the action sequences. You see every now and then it goes from widescreen to the aspect ratio changes every now and then. And so in an IMAX theater, when you see widescreen, you see bars on the bottom and on the top. But when it gets into the action scenes, it goes to this 4:3 so that it fills out the entire screen.
Yeah, and actually, they just released a new and improved version Blu-ray for Batman v Superman that has those IMAX aspect ratios in the movie. So they enhanced the HDR, high dynamic range, the color in the movie, as well as adding back in those IMAX scenes. There's actually a YouTube clip on Warner Brothers YouTube channel that has like a clip that features some of that IMAX footage, and it looks phenomenal. And one thing I also didn't realize about IMAX is that apparently they don't film sound, I guess. So that's really interesting how they make that work like that and how they're able to shoot it and to add the sound back in later on.
The other part that really lends to, because when I first saw the first trailer that they did in 4:3, it kind of took me back a little bit. It was like, what's going on here? Haven't seen this before. I'm not sure I like it. But then I saw the movie in 4:3 and it lends itself so well. And Zack Snyder, I mean, some directors out there would just want to be experimenting just to experiment. But actually the 4:3 ratio actually lends itself to a superhero movie very well, and lends itself very well for Justice League for a couple different reasons. The first being that it kind of pays homage to comic books. Comic book frames are not widescreen. They are more square, especially original DC comics and all that kind of stuff. So it really kind of ties back to that. But also Zack Snyder even has said that superheroes tend to be less horizontal. Instead, they are vertical. I mean, you see this with Superman. The only time he's really going horizontal is when he's flying. Otherwise, he is standing up. Heroes stand up. They are more vertical than they are horizontal. So it really does lend itself to a superhero movie very well, just thematically, not just as a experiment for experimental sake.
Yeah, Chris, how do you feel about the aspect ratio?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as well. I'm not as savvy to it as you guys are, but I mean, it really was interesting for me. Just kind of viewing that. I didn't realize he was going to be doing it that way until I saw the trailer, obviously, and that gave me a little buffer of time to kind of readjust. And then, yeah, I mean, after 5 minutes watching into the film, I didn't notice it at all. And like I said, I kind of watched the theatrical cut a few days prior. So there were like several scenes that, were in both versions of the film that having that aspect ratio, I think really did add to it. I'm trying to think. I think the main scene that I really came to mind for me was when Aquaman's walking out on that pier and the waves come through. That was pretty dope in this different framing for sure.
Yeah. There is another scene too with Diana and when she first meets up with Cyborg, when she's walking in the streets in Gotham, and you can see the moon way up in the corner. That's like coming through the clouds. And it's this really awesome looking shot because he's such a visual filmmaker, and just seeing images and moments like that just really makes you feel the scale, the epicness, even if there's not a whole lot like of action going on, you still feel it. And that's something that I love about it too.
Exactly. And the last thing I really want to talk about before I kind of turn it over to your guys' thoughts is I just really wanted to talk about Autumn and the whole reason that Zack Snyder had to leave. We kind of already touched on the fact that he left because his daughter committed suicide. But what is so beautiful about this film and about the Snyder Cut is that the last frame before it goes to credits is a title card that says "For Autumn," and then through the credits it plays "Hallelujah," which was his daughter's favorite song. And what is so amazing about this, though it ultimately led to him having to leave, that tragedy in his life actually shows so much through the Snyder Cut. You have all of these different characters that have to deal with grief in the film, and grief really plays a huge role into the film. I mean, all the characters, Ben Affleck's Batman and, Bruce Wayne and Lois Lane and Aunt Martha are dealing with the loss of Superman. Cyborg is dealing with the loss of his parents. Wonder Woman is dealing with the loss of Steve Trevor. Mara in The Nightmare is dealing with the loss of Aquaman, and Joker is dealing with the loss of Harley Quinn. And so there are so many characters that are dealing with loss in this. The fact that Zack Snyder was dealing with that same kind of loss himself really, really shows through this movie, and actually becomes the overriding theme throughout the movie is how do we deal with grief? How do we deal with loss? And how do we use it to actually make the world a better place, to be a driving force in our own lives and drives the superheroes to actually fight the bad.
Yeah. The unity, coming together, you're stronger together. It's such a beautiful message. And like you said, it plays so well in the movie. And especially the end song, Hallelujah by Alison Krauss, is just so amazing. And I get goosebumps just thinking about it, and she's an awesome musician. She's also in Man of Steel in a scene, in the bar scene. She's playing Johnny Cash. And in the background, that's kind of a cool cameo nod as well.
You know who else makes a cameo in the film? Zack Snyder himself.
Yeah, when Lois is at the coffee shop and she's walking out of the door, you can see in the background that Zack is sitting at a table, like writing or drawing, and he actually shared the image on Vero, his main social media site, where he was, had shown images in the past from the movie before it came out. And he had said that he was in that coffee shop. When you see him back there, like writing or drawing, he said that was actually him working on the storyboards for the movie. So he's in the movie writing the storyboards to make the movie. So it's kind of like this really cool kind of meta sort of reference or nod or whatever.
And so that kind of ends what I wanted to talk about the film. So I want to also give you guys the chance to, if you had any thoughts that we didn't cover that you'd want to talk about, this is your chance to kind of talk about those things.
The big thing for me was like, Superman is such a fucking badass in this movie. Like all in black, I'm like, holy shit. Like it was about 2 a.m. when I was finishing up this film, and about when he like finally reveals himself. And I'm like,
because in the comic books, Superman only has a black suit because black actually conducts light. And what does Superman get his power from? The sun. So that's why you see, when you first see him coming out of his ship in that black suit, where does he go? He goes up out of the atmosphere and opens his arms up to take in the sun to replenish his powers, since he just came back to life.
So cool. Oh my God. Yeah. But then, his whole entrance to, joining the rest of the League, breaking Steppenwolf's axe. Oh my God, dude. Like, I don't know, like when I was younger, I wasn't so much into Superman, but like this just kind of made me fall in love with Superman as a character, as a superhero, just all over again. That was like the big thing that like was really, I really loved about this film is like Superman like came in and like beat ass. Like this is like, he was just such a badass in this film.
But can we just talk about too, the badassery about this film? The fact that Zack Snyder was actually able to turn this from PG-13 film to an R film that it deserved.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it had to be R. Honestly, I was like, they made an R rating, but I mean, like, I'm glad he had that.
Are you kidding me? The fact that Steppenwolf at the end, his head is chopped off, his antler is chopped off.
I guess it does constitute an R rating.
That is so like, it's so vindicating for us as an audience, and it feels so good.
Yeah. I mean, well, even like you were kind of mentioning earlier, like Steppenwolf as a character, I just felt like his drive, like his why is a lot more prominent in this film, because in the original cut, I was like, man, it's just a weak villain, and we kind of understand why more so in this Snyder cut about, his why and why he is who he is. But yeah, I mean, I just really liked how they kind of set everything up in this film a little bit better. Honestly, Batman isn't killing those demons, and then for some reason the 3 mother boxes that are on the wall, and it's like, oh, this is what's going on. It just wasn't like blatantly obvious spoon fed to the audience the whole film. There's a lot more like, hey, what's going on? A lot more setup.
And the thing that I hate so much about the Joss Whedon cut is just how stereotypical, how campy it is. And what did Zack Snyder take out of Batman's plot in this movie versus the Joss Whedon cut? He takes away the stereotypical romance between Batman and Wonder Woman. I was so happy it wasn't in there.
It's a lot more nuanced. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of talked about, Cyborg being a lot more prominent already in this film. It seems like he really is fleshed out as a character, which I really appreciated. But even the Flash, like, he actually does something. He's important. All the characters have actual important roles in this Snyder cut. Instead of saving a family like in the theatrical cut,
random family,
he's reversing time and he's saving the literal planet. Yeah, I mean, there's just so much that really added to this film. As we were kind of saying, like, it was 4 hours, but it's 4 hours that I think were needed, or that at least are deserved to be in there. Like, Cyborg deserved to be in this film the way he's portrayed in this Snyder cut. And I think it's a crime that, he wasn't in the theatrical version. But yeah, that's kind of my big takeaways. I just felt like all the characters had a lot more of their why. Like they were kind of saying, this is Snyder's vision. And I think he got to kind of showcase, how he was kind of feeling about some things as well with the characters. And just as a fan of superhero films, I'm just really glad that we got to watch it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I remember like sitting at home a couple years ago and being like, man, like I so wish I could turn on and watch this movie, and I can't. I literally can't. And now to say that I can is awesome. I want to ask you guys also, did you watch the Justice is Gray edition of the movie?
No, I haven't yet.
I haven't yet.
Well, I'm going to have to watch it because what was really interesting about just this cut in general was I first watched for this podcast, I first watched the Snyder cut, and then I went back and watched the original theatrical version. And the thing that stands out so much more is the color. Like, it is so much more nuanced. There's a lot more grays, and there are points in the Snyder cut where it is almost completely just gray and black and white. So the fact that there is the Justice is Gray version, it works very well and actually isn't going to be too different than already what we saw in the original now Snyder cut too. So I'm so glad that he's able to do that.
Yeah, it's such a thing that you don't really see a whole lot of anymore, black and white movies. It's more of a stylistic choice. Like Mad Max Fury Road has a black and white version. I believe Logan has a black and white version as well. I haven't seen that one yet.
It does.
And I've heard it's really good. The Lighthouse, I think, came out last year. I think that was also black and white. I haven't seen that one yet, but it's really cool. And I watched it yesterday, that version of it. And, call me crazy, but I think that might be my preferred version of the movie to watch as well.
I mean, it is Zack Snyder's preferred version as well. So
yeah, I mean, some people, like, there's a stigma, I think, when it comes to black and white movies, but for a lot of people. But I would say to at least give it a shot. It does change the experience a little bit, and I think in a good way. I really think it comes together perfectly, and it's like, wow, it's almost like this was what he was intending when he was shooting the movie. It works out that well. Like there's a moment where you see, Steppenwolf looks amazing in the black and white version. Like he looks awesome in both versions, but it creates almost a little bit of a different experience, but still a fun experience. You're not focusing on the colors, you're focusing on the textures. There's different, shades of gray, not the movie shades of gray, but you know what I mean? Actual shades of gray, and the lighting, and like Steppenwolf, when he's in his base, looks incredible in black and white, especially like the ending when they're fighting, and it looks really cool. Superman with the chrome, the silver S looks really cool as well. So I really love that version.
I'm definitely going to have to watch it now. I was excited. I didn't know that it had come out yet. So I'm going to be watching that for sure.
Right on. I don't know. We talked about a lot of stuff. I just want to give a huge shout out to all the fans that have kind of endured throughout all the years and years of trying to bring this and get people on board and to realize, hey, this would be really awesome to see. And to see it come to fruition is so amazing. But yeah, huge shout out to a lot of the fans online. I know Zach's also been talking to a lot of them as well. People like I write for Real Anarchy website, and like John Garza, Ben Everts, Craig Lynn. Some amazing people there. who are huge supporters of the movement, like Comic Book Debate, the Nerd Queens, who hosted Justice Con, which was a fan convention last year that outperformed Comic-Con, believe it or not, just with like number of viewers and having some of the panelists, Zach talking about his version of the movie. And so a huge shout out to everyone that kind of helped bring this to light. And then there are people that I would love to meet someday that I haven't. But there might be some screenings in the future and maybe in the fall to look forward to. So
now that we kind of get down to the end of the podcast, I just want to, we've talked about it. I know you guys are going to want to recommend this film, but I just want to kind of get your final thoughts. And if you would recommend this film for our viewers to watch, if they haven't already watched it, and why they need to watch it, and kind of give your final thoughts and reviews of the movie. If you loved it, how much you loved it, and just let our viewers know what you think.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think this is the best. I think it was $70 million HBO spent on this. Best they could do with that money, I should say. But yeah, I would just say, to the listeners, if you haven't already watched the film, definitely do so. And if you haven't, seen the theatrical cut, definitely jump on this one. But I would definitely encourage people, if they have seen the theatrical cut and they haven't seen Snyder's vision, to definitely, especially as Darren was kind of saying, after people have really been pushing for this for so many years, definitely sit down, check it out, and let me know what you guys think. Honestly, I'll love to hear back from you guys.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this movie, if you couldn't tell. But yeah, it's so amazing that this movie exists. It really, not only does it work really well as a movie, it is a lighter movie than like Man of Steel and BVS. So if you're one of those people who's worried about the tone, who maybe don't like darker movies, it's not as dark. Yes, it's technically rated R. I would contend that it maybe shouldn't be rated R. That I think very light R.
It's a very light R. There's a little bit of blood and stuff, but it's actually used it very sparingly, and it's actually done not gratuitously, and it is done with a lot of respect.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I would recommend just checking it out, see what you think. You can watch. The cool thing is it's in parts, so you can watch the first 2 parts of it together. You can watch the first half of it and come back to it. I think Zach said the best time to take a break, if you need to, is after part 4, Change Machines, I believe it's called. So that would be, I think it's right about 2:20 into the movie. Be the best time if you're going to take a break. We're in a good spot to do that. But yeah, I love the movie. I love how Zach got to complete his real vision for the movie, and it's so awesome to see it being successful. Obviously, I would love to see more movies in this universe, even if Warner Brothers doesn't seem to think so, as they have for a long time. But, like Cyborg, would be really awesome to see him get, Ray Fisher with everything he's been going through. It'd be awesome to see him continue. He was so awesome. He was my movie MVP in a way. It'd be awesome to see him continue. Who knows what's happening with the Flash stuff right now. And I've been a huge proponent for a long time. It broke my heart when Ben Affleck wasn't able to make his Batman movie, especially seeing that and with Deathstroke,
Say what you will about Ben Affleck and him as an actor and his Batman, his version of Batman. Say what you will about it, but he deserved, and we as an audience deserved, his vision for a standalone Batman film. And come on. Joe Manganiello too so deserves to be a main villain of a movie. Deathstroke actually able to have his time on the theatrical screen. We saw him in one of the final scenes and in a very horrible end credit scene in the Whedon cut, but he so deserved. I was so looking forward to seeing a Joe Manganiello's Deathstroke, and I was so looking forward to that, and we didn't get it, and we won't get it.
Yeah, I know. But hey, who knows, right? Especially with how they restored the Snyderverse hashtag and how huge that was online. There's obviously a demand for it. So if you're in the world of business, you're kind of crazy not to pursue that. But who knows what's going to happen? Obviously the Nightmare timeline would be really interesting to dive into. And if anyone wants to, is curious and wants to learn more about the fan movement that kind of led to the movie coming out, there's actually a book written by Sean O'Connell called Release the Snyder Cut that kind of dives into the, what happened and how this fan movement kind of rallied. And even though there was a lot of people in the industry, like the media, and whatnot, were saying it doesn't exist and it's never going to happen, it's a cul-de-sac and all this stuff, and to still kind of thrive and to fight for what we believe in and come together just like the movie and give a lot of money to charity in the process. I mean, it's really awesome. And if you want to learn more, there's an awesome book that you could check out as well, Release a Snyder Cut by Sean O'Connell.
Yeah, I came to this movie so looking forward to it. I've been waiting, as all the fans have, since the Justice League came out and we knew all the stuff that happened. And it finally has gotten its due. It's gotten the justice it so deserves. And I might be a controversial kind of hot take I'm taking, but in my opinion, it is the quintessential superhero movie. It is one of the greatest superhero movie out there because it actually does each character justice. It actually gives each character the time and the passion and the creativity and the due diligence on Zack Snyder's cut as a writer and as a filmmaker to give these people the time that they need to on screen and give these people the ability to showcase how great each one of them is and do it in one movie. I mean, there's so many movies out there that are given the time constraint and we don't get what we need to as an audience to actually understand the character fully. So I think it is one of Zack Snyder's greatest movies. I'm so glad that he was able to make it. I mean, my one critique, Snyder does overuse slow-mo just a little bit, but it works really well, and I can't fault him for actually being able to get his vision out on screen. And I'm so glad that he was able to, and I so recommend this movie. I mean, it does have the paywall behind HBO Max, but HBO Max is one of the best streaming services out there, and so it is so worth it, even just for this movie. So go watch it, please. And with that, thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast. I want to give you guys the ability to shout out your social media where people can follow you and follow along with what you guys are doing. Let us know what's going on in your life.
Yeah. And also Martian Manhunter. That was awesome to see as well. And just the end of the movie and how it kind of ties into BVS with Bruce Wayne, seeing the alien as the threat, Superman, and to end the movie with Martian Manhunter and him accepting that, it's kind of like how he's really transformed on his journey, that an alien shows up and he's cool with it. And that's so awesome. But yeah, you can find me on most social media sites. My most active ones are Twitter and Vero, either at my name, Darren Kirsch, or Darren Kirsch 16. You can also sometimes find me usually about once a month on the Always Hold On to Smallville podcast as well. If you're a fan of Superman or a fan of old school 2000s young Clark Kent, that was an awesome show that I'm also on that podcast as well.
Awesome. Yeah. As far as you can always follow me on Instagram, especially with portrait photography at christophers.snap.shots. Otherwise, if you want to connect more personally, feel free to look me up on Facebook at Christopher Amick.
Yeah. And as always, you can follow me on Facebook, Nick Leach, and then on Instagram at nick.fleeto.leach, and join the Cinema Club Facebook group at facebook.com/group/the Cinema Club TCC, and listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And last but not least, please leave us a review on iTunes. It really will help us reach a lot more listeners and invite a lot more members to the club that may not be able to find it organically on Facebook. So please leave us a review on iTunes. It would really help us out. So with that, thank you guys so much for being on the podcast as my guests. And thank you all to my listeners for listening. You are awesome. You are great. And we'll see you on the next one.